child, yeah. Troubled child. Oh, he sounds a la la. Oh, child, oh, child, oh, child, oh, child, oh, child. Oh, child. Oh, child. Oh, child. Oh, child. Oh, child. Looking for your dad, but didn't know his mom. Looking for your dad, but didn't know his mom. Looking for your dad, but didn't know his mom.
Peace. Welcome to another broadcast of the Knowledge of Self radio show. My name is Teray Allah.
Peace. Jakil Knowledge Allah.
Peace, Jarul Allah.
We'd like to welcome you to another broadcast of KOS Radio on October the 27th, what we call Wisdom God. So each show, of course, is brought to you by Global Position Solutions. You can contact them at gpsolutions.net. And if you'd like to keep in touch with us and see anything that we're doing and look at, past broadcasts, you can log on to knowledgeofselfradio.weebly.com. So as always, let's begin with the quote of this show by Cristoforo Colombo. It says here, "These people are very unskilled in arms. With 50 men, they could all be subjected and made to do all that one wished." So on today's show, we're going to actually talk about three very interesting phases of colonization. Beginning with our holiday. As we know, Halloween is coming up on October the 31st, and we're going to show you some of the connections between the superstitions that people generally, embrace in the Western world and in the world at large, as well as how the current drugs that are introduced to people in the form of sugar, which is what we're going to be building on today, and also how that also ties into this idea of misidentity. And we're going to get a really good opportunity to talk to you a little bit about how so-called Latinos or Hispanics have been made to be other than original people. So why don't we go ahead and get into today's current events, and I'd like to pass it over to Jakil. Peace, brother.
Peace. So my current event is a pretty interesting one. So I know a couple of times we built on the show dealing with martial law and different training manuals and Army regulation manuals that are coming out stating that that they need to get the citizen who believes in the Second Amendment right, and those type things. So now we've actually got a video that was leaked by an MP officer in military police when they were talking about gun confiscation.
Mm-hmm.
So, Bob, if you want to go ahead and shoot that, we can build about it.
Essentially, yeah, we pretty much at that time, your Second Amendment, or all your rights, First Amendment rights, pretty much everything is at that moment just interrupted. Yeah.
So you said that martial law suspends their Second Amendment, so I'm not going to, but would you say we would take weapons from people?
Yeah, that's what they do.
Yeah.
That's what they do, but
essentially,
I'm saying...
Yes, I wouldn't agree with that either. I believe the Second Amendment. But
okay.
Essentially, during a moment of martial law, we've lost all control. We're pretty much saying when the military moves in on your street, they are now saying you have no more rights. Pretty much, you're going inside your house. That's like the worst case scenario. So I'm saying when the way they're not looking at it, when the guard is used, that's how it's going to be used.
Yeah.
So we're not going to be off there on the street corner like, hey, we're here. Unless you're like you're assisting with some kind of event, you're not going to be involved in a riot and not really have any authority to do it.
No, you're not going to go knocking on doors and be like, all right, I need a shotgun. Here.
No.
You're not going to like go up to each house and say,
Well, they did that in Katrina, is why I'm asking. And if we're talking about shit hitting the fan, I'm not going to do it,
no, they're
but...
not going to do that necessarily. It's more or less like, hey, go in your house, shut up, stay there. That's what we do.
Okay.
Because that reason I have martial law in place is it's one of those situations where, like I said, everything's already broken down. It's a last resort to change pretty much your last ditch effort to put that law and order into that community. That's why they have an actual guard.
Okay.
Good question. I think they did that in Katrina, right? They go and take away people's guns.
Yeah. Which I think is bullshit, but...
You're going to claim your right to take a pride from your golden hands.
Yeah.
We're not going to get political right now.
Yeah, so there, you see it right there. They're already teaching the people. What you guys think about that?
It's no joke. When we're talking about, defending our own individual rights and the rights that we have to protect ourselves as citizens in this country, it gets a little bit more eerie. I don't necessarily scare easily, but I do become a little bit more aware in terms of, this type of talk about, disarming citizens and things of that nature. So, again, the white founding fathers of the United States, they did write that when the government attempted to take arms away from its citizens, then the government would become tyrannical. Right. So, I just keep that in mind with those types of ideas.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think that's just, it's crazy how you hear about these different things, but now you actually see it kind of manifest, right in front of you. That dude's having a conversation. And he kind of tried to clean it up by saying, they wouldn't necessarily take guns unless it was like a real serious, dire situation. But like the dude mentioned over and over again, Katrina. So, I guess what would they classify as a serious, dire situation? And then, you got to think, well, they keep having all these, let's just connect the dots. Every time they have a training drill of a what-if situation, that what-if actually happened, right? So the newest thing they're going to have coming up here in November is a shutdown of the power up in like New York area, right? So anyone who's ever worked with computers or electronics that are supposed to stay on for a long time, you know that once you turn it off, everyone kind of, you cross your fingers and you go, okay, when I turn it back on, I hope it works. Kind of thing, right? So now how do you prepare for a situation to where you've got the power grid that you shut down, you turn it back on, it doesn't come back up again. And then, we know that these people always take every opportunity to push their agenda, right? So now if the power doesn't turn on, which it probably won't, now you can then say, oh, well, we're under attack by Syria and I have another news article that you have this billionaire says the U.S. should drop an atomic bomb on Iran just to show our position of power, right? So you have people kind of making these kind of suggestions, and then you know that they're kind of prone to do those kind of things, right?
Since they've done it before, Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah. So you gotta wonder what were they used to kind of stage some kind of event to make something look something other than what it really is. Throw off some madness.
Well, stay tuned. I know you're gonna continue to hit us back with that. Continue to feed our listeners. I think, if anything, something in what you said was interesting. How the gentleman said that we're not going to take people's guns away, or not literally, but I mean, if you think about the context in which that is said. There are only two ways you can take someone's gun from them. One would be to kill them, and the second one would be if they surrender the gun. But in an emergency situation, it's highly unlikely you're going to get people to just, here's my gun.
Right.
So,
well, I mean, the sad truth, and although I think some people are waking up, is you do have people, and I'm going to try to find that article. Somewhere in Texas, they did petition, a fake petition, and they were having people sign up to put helmets on people who were walking and texting because it was dangerous, and to do it for Obama. And people were like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And so, we do live, unfortunately, in a culture where people are influenced by icons, right? And so, whether it's your favorite football player, your favorite rapper, or your favorite president, right? People are easily swayed by their opinions and their thoughts on things, right? So you have Obama initially, before he came president, saying, "I'm not going to take your guns. I would never try to take your guns." To saying, "Yeah, sure, I'm totally going to take your guns. I want all your guns, shotguns and everything. Give them all to me." And so then with that, you're going to have a certain amount of people who would have been like, "Yeah, that's right. Keep my gun." And then he's going to say, "Give me your gun." And they're going to say, "Well, okay, because you're a really nice dude, and I like you, and I kind of want to be like, I want my son to be like you, so I'm gonna show a good example. Here's my gun." Right?
It's crazy because this kind of actually ties into the show. I was actually reading in regards to how the Arawak Indians, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but the Arawak Indians, is said to have no religion at the time that Columbus did arrive in, that region. And they didn't really look at anyone in that stance of, it was real equal. It was equality. So there wasn't like there was a leader per se. You might have people who were considered elders and things of that nature, but it wasn't like I'm bowing down to some higher power. So it's funny because you look at Columbus, who came, heavily with the Christianity, and that was like his basis for everything that he did. Even in a lot of his logs, he would say, our Lord and Savior is basically who I'm giving the praise to for coming to this land and killing these people and taking over it. You know what I mean? But not to jump too far ahead, but it's just crazy to see how, as soon as you start looking at yourself as the supreme one, you start to give it to someone else or a mystery god or anything that isn't you. That's when you start to lose your power. You lose your sense of rationality, and you just basically sit back and let things kind of manifest themselves, as opposed to taking control yourself.
That's today's mathematics right there.
Right. That's it. Man, great point, Jeru and Brother Jakil. I know, Jeru, you have a hot news story coming out.
Oh, yeah.
And, some of the stuff that we report on this show, you're not going to get this on Fox News unless it's sugar-coated or laced with a little bit of comedy to make you, be a little bit at ease. Oh, they're taking our guns away. Ha, 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 ha. Next report. It's not like that on this show. Go ahead, Jeru.
Yeah, this one kind of actually ties into our last show where we were building about, kind of movies, how movies predict what's going to, inevitably happen in real life or in our society. This article comes from livescience.com. And the headline is "Gun-Toting Robots May Fight Alongside Soldiers in Future Battles." So, basically, I'll read a little bit of it. American soldiers may soon be joined on the battlefield by machine gun-toting robots on wheels, according to the U.S. Army officials. Earlier this morning, military leaders attended a technology demonstration at Fort Benning, Georgia, where robotics companies exhibited their most advanced weaponized creations, reported ComputerWorld.com. The display was designed to show potential ways robots could support troops in combat. So they basically showed a demonstration where, Army leaders watched a human controller command a wheeled robot positioned more than 300 feet away open fire with M240 machine gun. The robot, which uses thermal imaging technology to spot concealed enemies, could protect soldiers from potentially dangerous assaults.
Wow.
So the thing about this that's most eye-opening to me is that, at some point, depending upon how good these robots work, they're not going to need human soldiers anymore. because obviously with a human soldier, there's always going to be a chance of that soldier using his own mind.
Yeah, yeah,
Empathy will kick in and say, wait a minute, something's not right.
no doubt. As we talked about in that other video where the soldier was like, no, I'm not going to take the people's guns. A robot is never going to tell you,
Exactly.
no, I'm not going to take the people's guns.
Right.
And if you look into it, they've actually fired the first and second in command of nuclear launches in America, and a bunch of other top-ranked generals have been let go because of
the human element.
Human element, exactly.
So it's crazy because the more successful they are with this technology, just like all the technology, and you see people losing jobs left and right, the more that you'll see robotic soldiers opposed to human soldiers.
Right.
So then you're gonna have a group of people who can't make a living that way. What are you gonna do with these people?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised because, all of these areas with the United States, they're doing these, military excursions. People can't really see it, but those are poor areas that they're going into. They're just in a different part of the world. So as it stands, what's stopping them from using these types of things in the neighborhood, in what we call the hood, because that's always been the fertile ground for any experiment that the U.S. government or any scientist has wanted to carry out. Let's see how these people react to this.
Right.
Last time I checked, technology wasn't really meant to harm human beings. It was actually meant to help human beings. So if you go back into your history and study the things that original people have created, most of those things were for the benefit of humanity, so that we can make progress and things became a little easier. So it's really interesting to see how they've taken our science and mathematics and used it to create destructive things.
Right, no doubt. When you look at the first, there's 3 rules of robotics, basically, and you guys can look this up, but the first rule is...
Please write these down. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I would only give you the first one because that's the important one, right? The other 2 really don't necessarily matter as much if you don't have the first one in place. And that first rule is a robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to become harmed. So here we have robots acting as soldiers, which means that they're going to be killing human beings. But that goes against the first law of robotics, is having a robot injure a human being. So I think, technology can definitely be a great thing, depending on its use.
Right.
And I think right now you're seeing a great misuse of technology.
Yeah. And one last point from that article that was interesting to me, especially based on what we built about as it relates to last show, is the companies that were there demonstrating their hardware was Northrop Grumman, which I've heard of that or seen that somewhere.
Northrop.
iRobot Corp. So there's an actual company called iRobot.
Not just the movie with Will Smith.
Not just the movie with Will Smith. An actual company called iRobot Corp. And HDT Robotics, as well as Quintet IQ. So just the iRobot Corporation, that kind of stood out to me based on movies really showing what's going to be happening in the future.
Right. And no, it's good that you brought that up because in that movie they introduced the robot as kind of more like a personal assistant. Right. So it would help your kids and clean the house for you and stuff like that. And then eventually it was kind of like Hotel Rwanda. They were like, cut the tall trees and all the robots switch sides. Well, I guess Star Wars, execute, what was it, Order 54 or something?
Wow. Well, I mean, in a nutshell, what I found on the BBC.com is and actually they released this report on October the 25th. As many of us know, they've been doing quite a few of excavations in Peru, and recently they found some mummies that they date as being about 1,000 years old in Peru. According to the news, and again, you should take this with a grain of salt, what the news says, but apparently it was a mother and a child, and it appeared to be some sort of sacrifice that group of people made to a god because from what they found, it looked like the child had been buried alive. The interesting thing about these types of findings is that it continues to predate the coming of Columbus to the Americas. So these particular mummies are considered pre-Columbian. So please keep an eye out on the news. I mean, they found quite a few things over the last 40 or 50 years that, again, validates the fact that our people are original people on the planet, but more importantly, that there's a shared culture. It's just that we're separated in different parts or different regions of the world, but we are one people.
No doubt.
Only one group of us came later. So keep that in mind. I want to go ahead and pass it back to Jaquil. He has another interesting news wire for you.
Yeah, indeed. So this next one I wanted to bring up here is actually from Let me pull that up apart. So in any event, this article is dealing with the CDC. One of the main guys from the CDC is talking about how we are at the end of antibiotics, and that they will no longer be a functional or a choice to treat simple infections that we're curing currently, or that we have cured 50 years ago. So people will inevitably be dying from simple, common curable things, that we could have fixed if we would have used antibiotics properly. And that's kind of the angle on this article, is that due to the misuse of antibiotics, over prescribing them for everything, we've kind of created a super virus, or super viruses, bacteria that we no longer have the answer to cure. So now they're kind of looking towards older, harsher ways of trying to treat these things, which causes kidney damage, liver damage, as opposed to turning to a natural, more of a natural way of healing, right? They still are going to go shoot towards these drugs.
And it's good that you mentioned that. And again, those of you who are just now watching our show, we encourage you to watch the shows that we broadcasted beginning in February, which is our anniversary date of this show, because this has been, we talked about this before. One of the things that came out on the show was the idea that since chickens are being treated with antibiotics, what it does is it neutralizes its, how shall I say, its effectiveness in the medical field.
Right.
So basically what you're going to find in some situations is that, and I've actually discovered this just by taking my son to the doctor. One of the things the doctor told me is that, well, we don't give people antibiotics anymore. Of course, they don't give you a reason for that. But if you watch one of our shows, we talk about how since the chickens and the cows and all these other animals are being pumped up with antibiotics to prevent them from getting sick, we as human beings, we're consuming poultry and meat, and what we don't know is that we're getting a dose of antibiotics. Right. So when you get ill and you go to the doctor, they're not going to give you antibiotics, and quite frankly, they may not be able to give you anything. Because you've already built up an immunity for antibiotics. So it's really groundbreaking information here on the Knowledge Self Radio Show.
Indeed.
Thank you for that.
And then when you look at kind of talking about TV and movies and how they kind of talk about current things that are happening or things that will happen, The Walking Dead. Right, which is basically what you're going to see.
I was watching that last night.
I can't wait to get home for Walking Dead today. Right, but and just kind of on a tangent on the Walking Dead thing. On the first episode, when they first, not the first episode, the first episode of this season, they show the guy at the fence, and they make a point to zoom in on this dude. And he's got his eyes are bleeding. Right, he's at the gate. When you look at what's happening in Japan, Fujima, with the radiation, they're talking about how people are bleeding from the eyes from the
Wow.
radiation. Yeah, so I was like, why would you make a point to zoom in on a zombie who's bleeding from the eyes
Mhm.
and show him at the gate? They just had another earthquake Friday, maybe, or Saturday in Japan. Same kind of area. At first, they were saying it was like a 6 point something. Now they're saying it's high as like a 7 point. I want to say like 6 or 7 last time I checked. And so they were already saying ahead of time that if they have an earthquake like this, it'll cause those rods to go critical and blow.
Wow. You know, our heart goes out to our people in Japan. You know, I mean, definitely stay in tune to any news source that, you know, will basically assess the safety of all of these things that are going on. I mean, because, you know, quite frankly, there is this mentality in some governments where they only look out for a few people that they feel are really important, whereas the others can be sacrificed or they're expendable. So, you know, thank you for that, guys.
Yeah,
I
no
mean,
doubt.
groundbreaking information here. I learned something every single Sunday. I want to pass it back to Jarul.
Yeah. So this one comes from realpharmacy.com, and the headline is MMR vaccine causes autism, courts quietly confirm. So MMR stands for measles, mumps, and rubella. And basically, I'll read a little bit of it.
Is that the shot that they give you at like age 2? They give you the big, huge shot.
Yeah, and when you think about autism, they say you can't really tell if a child has it till around age 2.
So, go ahead, guy. I don't want to catch you.
Oh, no, yeah.
I gotta. I'll just add on real quick, and I might have shared it on the show. At age 2, like we were talking about, is where you get that big shot. So I and my big brother, effectively, both had children who were the same age. So I told my woman, "You better not take him to the doctor and get a shot. There would be problems."
Right.
He kind of said that, and they might have had some kind of different conversation than I had with my partner. And he ended up taking his son to go get those shots, and almost instantaneously, the kid was autistic. So, I mean, I've got firsthand experience of how definitely that can happen.
So we're dealing with actual facts here. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, I mean, even these drug companies though have quietly admitted that it does cause autism. But basically, what they do is they'll pay out money to these families, you know, whose children did get autism, but they would also make them have to sign off on something like they do with the farmers, saying that you know you're not allowed to discuss this case or anything like that. You can't make a big stink out of it, otherwise you lose that money. You know what I mean? So, and actually, a guy by the name of Andrew Wakefield, a doctor in Texas, did a little study back in 1996, and he came out with a research paper in '98 that basically proved, you know, that autism is caused by those vaccinations. And he's been ridiculed ever since. So he's basically in obscurity now. He lost his medical license and things of that nature.
Yeah,
but
for sure. Going against the
yeah,
system.
exactly. So now he's actually just writing books and things of that nature. So, you know, I mean, we've already said it time and again on this show, specifically about how, you know, vaccinations do cause more harm than good.
Right.
So here's more evidence that proves that fact.
Right.
You know.
And what was that guy's name who brought out that evidence?
Oh, Andrew Wakefield.
Okay.
Dr. Andrew Wakefield.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I want to say, regardless of who that person is, we should stand on the side of people who go out of their way to make these things happen.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because if we're not supporting those people, it makes it a lot harder for other people to want to come out and do these things, right? And so,
and then it's filed off like a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, even shows like this where, you know, we live in this society and, you know, you really wouldn't know us unless you had seen us on this radio show. We fit in just like everyone else. However, what we research and what we study opens our eyes to a lot of things that, you know, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, people will confirm that there were certain people that stepped out about it during that time and they were correct.
Right.
You know, so instead of just putting it off as a conspiracy theory, definitely do your research on anything that we're addressing, because we always need more people to add on and create a new body of knowledge, you know, that's going to shed some light on some of these things, you know, in question.
Yeah.
So I like to thank my brothers for the current events. And we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to go into the first segment of the show. And see you soon. Peace.
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 Peace. Welcome back to the Knowledge Yourself radio show. My name is Teray Allah.
Peace. Jakil Najala.
Peace, Jarulullah.
And before we left, we did introduce some interesting current events. And now it's time to get into our first segment. We're going to begin with just showing you a couple of books that we drew some information from. So the first one is titled A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. And I've been hearing that this is a must-read for about a decade.
Yeah, I mean, you know, anyone who's into history, I think he does a great job at really taking you through what you would learn in school. So he takes you through basically the same curriculum,
Okay.
but he obviously presents the actual facts of the matter. You know, it's not like Columbus comes here and
He's the savior to the Indian people.
exactly. He's actually
That's not how it happened?
Right.
People are saying that?
He's actually showing and proving what really went down, and you know, he's more clear on both sides of the coin. You know, yeah. So it's a great book.
And the next one is it's titled The Norton Anthology of Latino Literature by Ilan Stavins, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And the interesting thing about this book is it begins with some nonfiction literature, and it focuses on some of the early explorers in, I should say, the early European explorers that made contact with the indigenous people in the Indies and the Americas. So it's a really good read because it gives you a historical background on all the different phases of colonization, a couple of which we'll talk about today. So, you know.
That sounds dope. It looks like if you carry it with you, it'll not only give you a strong mind, but a strong a strong body. It's kind of a heavy book.
Man,
So
that's
it might be
right.
something you just read at the house.
So we're going to go ahead and divvy up our questions. To begin with, number one, what is Halloween then and now? Number two, how does Halloween reinforce superstitions and the idea of spooks? Yeah, that's right, spooks.
Stay with it.
Number three, what is the harm of celebrating Halloween? And number 4, what are the negatives and positives of celebrating spooky holidays? I'm going to let Jaquil take the next 4.
Indeed. What does sugar really do to the body? Immune system, inflammation. How did candy become associated with Halloween? How much do Americans spend on celebrating Halloween each year? What harmful ingredients? What harmful ingredient in candy should you and your children avoid eating?
Okay. Number 9, how does exposure to sugar at a young age affect you as a grown man? Number 10, how can Christopher Columbus's legacy be considered a reign of terror? Who were the explorers that came to the Americas after Columbus, and how did they continue Columbus's reign of terror on the Americas? Number 11, how were Hispanics, Latinos, Latin Americans made? And 12, why do teenagers wreak havoc on Halloween?
Okay, so just
we
sort of.
should have
Yeah,
added
go ahead.
another question.
Yeah, what's up?
Number 13, what on Halloween gives women an excuse to dress like sluts?
There you go.
I'm going to just throw that one out there.
Man.
Thank you
email
very
is
much.
jockhill187@gmail.com. Yeah, I said it.
Yeah, man. Some of the stuff that I've been seeing young ladies and or women wearing. You know, I was talking to the Queen last night, and I asked her. I said, isn't that something that you would wear inside of your house as opposed to going to a party? So I mean, when we deal with these things, we're not knocking anyone that wants to celebrate any holiday, except the killing of the black man and black woman. Okay, if they bring a holiday like that, that's when we, will definitely fight you. But anything else, it's your choice. It's just, keep it clean. If it's gonna be fun, it can be clean, man.
No doubt. No doubt.
So we're gonna begin the first segments talking about the origins of Halloween. So just in our research, we did find some very similar information about where Halloween was first practiced and where it came from. And the story, at least in some of the research I did. And actually, before I even get into it, let me just give you that link. There's a link on the history.com website. If you put in history.com/topic/Halloween, they have some 2-minute video clips about the origin of Halloween. So to begin with, this was basically a practice that began with honoring the dead. So this was among the Celts, okay, who we know as being the Irish. And one of the things, I know you guys probably came across this, but this was something that was led, or this practice that came to be known as Halloween today, was led by Druid priests. And if you do the knowledge on Jordan Maxwell, he'll tell you a little bit about the connection between Druids and the name Hollywood. But in any case, right, it needs to be said that they were pagans. So aside from that, since we're answering the question, what was Halloween then? It started out, and I have a really hard time pronouncing this, so I'm gonna do this with fidelity. It's spelled Samhein. It looks like Samhain, but it's pronounced Samhain. So this holiday that was practiced by the Celts was called Samhain, and it was meant to, bring remembrance of dead ancestors and things of that nature. Now, as the story progressed in history, the idea was that the ghosts of the deceased were going to return to town on, if I'm not mistaken, November the 1st. November the 1st, thank you. And in order to, I guess, prevent the terror that would come from, not being a ghost, that group of people decided that they were going to wear masks to fool the ghost, so that the ghost would think that they were one of them. They were also said to put, wine and food in front of their houses for sake of that.
Right. So trying to appease the ghost spirits.
Right. So we're back at dealing with the spookism that comes from Western and/or European culture. Did you want to add on, God?
Yeah, from my research, I was doing a little bit of research on the Celts. The Celts would be considered some of the original Europeans. So, some would only consider Celts to be Irish or Caucasian, but there was a point when the Celts were actually original people.
Can you repeat that last
The
part?
Celts were original people, yes. They would also be considered Iberians because that's the region that they come from. But the thing that was interesting to me was that the significance of November 1st, October 31st, and November 1st was that it dealt with the harvesting time. So it would be the end of the harvest going into the winter, which was considered like the underworld type of situation where things would die based on it being cold and the harshness of winter was about to roll in. So they say that November 1st basically was the day between the living world and the dead world, in that for some reason that day was symbolic to a blending of those two worlds.
Okay.
And that's how these individuals who were dead would actually be able to come into this living world and wreak havoc and things like that. So, I thought that was interesting.
Wow, it's deep.
That is pretty deep.
I mean, come on, man. This is the Knowledge of Self radio show. Like I said, I learn something every single week. So, as this story progressed, and this Samhain holiday sort of, was widely practiced in specific areas of Europe. A man by the name of Pope Gregory III, who came to power in the 8th century, essentially, you might as well say it, he hijacked the holiday to take I don't know if you want to call it the paganism out of it, but in turn, instead of it being called Samhain, he declared something known as All Saints' Day. Okay, during his reign. And let me tell you how it all comes full circle.
Please do.
Because we do deal with mathematics on this show, and like minds, that's why we're here today. 2 things that the god Jekyll said in his current events, 2 words. One of them was Syria. You need to be aware that Pope Gregory III was born in Syria, although he wound up being a pope, a Roman Catholic pope.
Right.
All right. In addition to that, he also said that in the United States, people are really into icons. Now, here's the thing that Pope Gregory III was known for. He was known for, I guess, engaging in this debate with members of the Catholic Church, which was known as, or what is known as, the iconoclastic debate, which is basically Roman Catholics during his time were firmly against using idols and images of, Jesus and all the stuff we see today. So
they obviously lost that battle.
Exactly. Okay, because the people who I guess would be considered a little bit more pious in their religion, more dedicated, they decided, we don't want any type of graven images to represent our Lord. We don't want any pictures of Mary, angels, and everything else that you see today.
Right.
So as time went on, and we're talking about Samhain to All Saints' Day, now we have something different developing in like the 18th century in the United States, because that was when you had Irish immigrants come in with that old practice that started in the old school days.
Right.
Of October 31st, we're gonna dress up this way, and we're gonna do these different things. And I think at that point it was said to catch on.
Well, it took a little while.
Oh yeah,
to catch on here in America.
Yeah,
right?
definitely. Even back in Europe, basically when you think about the Roman Catholic Church, they were about trying to, when you think about a crusade, all that means is you're going around and trying to get everyone in every land that you come across to be Christian, whether by force or have them, willingly convert, right? So, I think that, when you think about that, what they were trying to do is find ways to make people make it easier for people to convert to Christianity. So they looked at what's considered Samhain, and they looked at a day that they might have practiced, and they looked at how they could blend those 2 days to be one, so that those people would have an easier time accepting Christianity because they're still doing what they would normally do anyway.
Right.
So they kind of blended those things together.
Yeah, I could totally see that because the key word of that thing was Roman Catholic Church, and we know that Rome was very proficient in not just conquering people and saying, okay, you're going to do what we do now. They would conquer you and be like, oh, well, you can still do what you're doing. You're just part of Rome now. We actually kind of have something similar to what you're doing. It's just called this, and that's what you guys should do now.
Yeah.
Like you said, it makes it easier for people to fall into play.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Relating to America, from my research, I found that, like in the North, like New England, that region, a lot of them weren't dealing with Halloween because they were more Protestant. So they dealt with, obviously, what you were saying as it relates to more of, the religion of the book as opposed to the religion of the popes.
Okay.
And then in the South, you had more of the religion of the popes. You had people practicing, Christianity or, Catholicism that way.
Right.
So, there was obviously still that separation between those two groups. But as time progressed, basically, it's to me, from my research, it was just initially like small gatherings that people would come together and, just kind of have parties or whatever.
Okay.
And that was really the basis early on. But as time progressed, it got into what we deal with today. So
now, did any of you come across? Because you mentioned the Irish. Any of you come across them using that as kind of as a means of like freedom, right? So one thing I came across in my research is that traditionally it was a turnip, and then the whole kind of knocking on your door on the trick or treat thing was kind of more of the immigrants or the lower class trying to get something from what they deemed to be the rich or the people who were stepping on them per se, right? So they would show up at the house like trick or treat, and they would have turnips or whatever in their hands. And if they gave them something, then cool, they wouldn't get turnip bombed.
That's right. Because what they were doing is the poor people would go around at that time to try to get some stuff, so that they could help, their family and their situation out. But if they didn't get it, you're right. That's some of the things that they would do. One thing else that I found was that the whole storytelling about the dead is it comes from that time. So you see a lot of these
from the Celtic or
because what it was, you get together and talk about your relatives that passed. You kind of reminisce a little bit about the dead.
Drink a little.
Exactly. So those stories obviously became mystical over time, and then you developed into what we see as these horror movies and stuff like that today.
Well, it's just like any language that has been created in the Western world. How it's you have all these languages kind of put together, and then it becomes a bastard language where everything is kind of mixed in. One of the things, just because I wanted to confirm what the God Jekyll was building on in terms of the poor and the whole practice of Halloween. One of the sources that I came across, it said that since these Irish immigrants had just come over to the United States, and they had just been, I guess they had lived in Ireland during the potato plight.
Yeah, potato
they all came here and they were dirt poor, and so that was a way for them to sort of get handouts or whatever you want to call it, get a little bit more. Check out Angela's Ashes. That's a really good movie about the setting is during the potato plight. It's pretty interesting stuff right there. Yeah, it's depressing as hell though. So. Watch that when you upbeat somewhere. Man,
one thing I thought was interesting is pertaining to you mentioned women dressing half naked on that so-called holiday.
Right.
Was one of the practices early on was young women believed that on Halloween they could divine the name or appearance of their future husband by doing tricks with yarn apple paring, or mirrors.
Wow.
Huh.
So
Or
that
cherry sticks.
right. So all that changed. That changed to let me just put on some half-naked clothes and see if I can get a husband that way.
Wow.
Unbelievable, man.
Wow.
You know,
I suppose you can, but I listen to enough hip hop to know that you cannot make a whole housewife. Thank you, Dr. Dre.
so now I think we all need to address this question because we do have children. Yeah, I'm going to escort my son out. He's going to be a Power Ranger. Yeah, I mean, but however, I have talked to him about the reality behind this particular custom. First of all, I make it very clear to him that, you know, this is not what we would consider culture in our household. So, and a lot of us, you know, I could hear gods and earths. Some will be split. Some will say, nah, absolutely not.
Right.
Others will say, man, it doesn't matter. Just explain the science behind it, especially if you're like 6 years old. The one thing, and I got this from Jerul, is that I don't push this. You know what I mean? I don't make any mention of Halloween and things of that nature. Hey, let's go get a pumpkin and all that type of stuff. He hasn't requested a pumpkin because I'm not pushing it. But what is the harm in Halloween, especially among children? Like, how do we interpret that to our children to make sure that they understand that this is not religious and this is not something that we have to do? It gets a little funny in a school situation to where your child has friends and things of that nature, and you don't want your child to necessarily be ostracized.
Right.
You know, so what's everyone's take on this? What would be the negative and the positive of Halloween in modern terms of how it's being dealt with?
Funny that you mentioned that. And I'm going to say peace to my girl. She actually gave me some documents, and I left it at home. Thanks, babe. I did read them, however. And it was from her class as far as teaching children about different holidays, right? And how oftentimes, like you mentioned, God, how you don't push it and say Halloween is a culture, right? But what happens is a lot of these holidays, i.e. Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, right, gets pushed upon as being a cultural thing, right, as opposed to just kind of like being a thing that people do, or like you said, explain the science behind it. Right, I agree with you, God. I tell every year, I'm sure my kids are tired of hearing it, but every year I'm like, yeah, did you guys know that they use turnips? And it was kind of like a revolutionary thing, and people were fighting to get stuff. And they were carving pumpkins, and that wasn't used till they got to America. And then, so you know, I explained that to them. But I think part of the downside, and one of the things I came across in that article, or not an article, or printout workbook, whatever, they were talking about how kids view older people, right, like women particularly. So you have the whole connection of witches and older people. And so when children oftentimes will say, oh, I'm scared of this person. Well, why? Oh, because it reminds me of a witch. So I think that's one of the things that comes across with teaching Halloween like that is.
I think it's important to note that witches actually just all witch means is wise, right? And, you know, a witch would be considered, or in those times would be considered someone who, you know, was like a high scientist, like an alchemist or someone, you know, who understood science a little bit more than your average person. But your average person, based on them being kind of spooky, would look at that person like, oh, they're doing devilish stuff, you know what I mean? So they'd automatically be, you know, ostracized, hung, burned at the stake, and those types of things, you know?
Right, and you know, of course, we were the first people that were subjected to those types of practices because, you know, when Europeans first made contact with our people, you know, they looked at how our societies were set up. And of course, in many of those societies, you had what was known as a witch doctor or a shaman or shaman, however you want to pronounce it. Someone who was doing voodoo or houdon, you know, again. But the interpretation of that from the practitioner was completely different than the person who actually witnessed what the practitioner was doing. You know, if you're using herbs and roots and you're doing all these types of things, and the person comes over with their Christian practices per se, or Islamic practices in some areas of the world, you would say, well, they're dealing with the devil. So that's a very good point right there.
Yeah, one thing.
Go ahead, guys.
Oh no, one thing I thought was interesting is that they say that black cats were considered bad luck because witches are said to have turned into black cats. But to me, that's interesting because it's a black cat.
Yeah.
Right?
Why is it not a white cat? Yeah, no, that's a great thing. I was going to bring that up. The whole Halloween and the connection to black and black being bad, and then again that kind of gets pushed, and then that happens throughout the year too, right? So like you said, the black cat or the villain in black, other notations of black and degrading things, right? So children end up having kind of a repulse to things that are black, right? And that's being scary or spooky. So, i.e., black people now become scary or spooky, and things like that.
Wow. There's another thing I wanted to mention in terms of the harm in Halloween. One of the things that, when we go out into the streets, when I go out into the streets with my son, one thing I'll teach him is that, I'm not teaching you to be afraid of anything. All of this is make-believe, just like a cartoon. And I think it's our responsibility to teach our children the difference between fact and fiction. But more importantly, make sure in between these holiday seasons, we go heavy on teaching them about their identity and our culture. And that's one thing that I definitely go heavy on.
For sure.
So do you want to add?
No, yeah, I think that's very important. I think you can have your children dealing with, you said, holidays, but you have to really teach them the actual facts of these holidays,
right? So
that they're not just blindly following and doing what everybody else is doing.
Right.
That they're doing it because they feel like they want to do it based on their own rationale. It's not like, oh well, everybody in my school's dealing with Halloween, so I'm going to do it too. It's,
right.
It's fun. I'll do it. You know what I mean? But I know that it's, I know the origins of it. You know what I mean? So.
Exactly. Yeah. Or when your kids can teach that to their friends at school.
Right.
Right. So then your kids go to school and they're like, oh well, did you know that Halloween was da 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 da? And then they drop the knowledge on the kids at school, and then that causes an effect.
Man, two good fathers here. True indeed. So one of the things that I wanted to close with is basically how does this all tie into what's going to be the next two segments of the show. So as we get into our discussion in the third segment about colonization and our second segment about sugar and its harmful effects on the body, keep in mind that European contact with original people has always involved three things. Number one, the introduction of a religion. And more than that, using this religion to undermine or hijack original people's culture. The second thing, drugs. Depending on which group you want to study, generally drugs came in the form of alcohol. As we know in Asia, opium, and in South Central Los Angeles, crack cocaine. So I mean, you can take it as far back as thousands of years up until within the last 20 years. And of course, the third thing is colonizing our people by way and use of violence, which is really going to come up in the third segment. So keep those three things in mind, and we're going to come right back at you in a few minutes. Peace. Pardon self, man. My water heater is leaking a lot of water, so my leg is starting.
Oh, okay.
I'm telling you. Peace. Welcome back to the Nod Yourself Radio Show. My name is Teray Allah.
Peace. Jakil Allah.
Peace, Jarullah.
And before we left, we were talking about the significance of Halloween, its history, its origins, and how that is one phase of what we consider European colonization on our people. So, in essence, Halloween, the way it's being practiced, is similar to religion. All right? So just keep that in mind. This second segment, we titled it "The Monster We Call Sugar." So it's a really good discussion that we need to have about, since all of our children and adults too are going to be consuming quite a bit of sugar over the next, I might as well say since the month began, because some people get started rather early because of the sales. But let's get into a discussion about, how sugar affects the body and what some of you out there who are parents, what you need to really look out for if you're going to be, engaging in these types of holiday practices. So I wanted to give it over to Jarul. About sugar.
When we got to this part, I kind of wanted to look at the origins of how candy itself got connected with Halloween and
It started rather early because of the sale.
Some of the origins of that. So when we look back into these candy corporations were initially making their money specifically, obviously, on selling candy throughout the year, but they tied it more specific to holidays like Christmas and Easter. But obviously, when you think about Easter and Christmas, you had more of a focus of other things, whether it be presents and other different distractions. So the main focus wasn't really the candy. Also, when you look at the times of early Halloween, it was more of a community thing. So people would cook and provide things that they actually physically made in their house. And that would be what they gave. So if people came around and, went trick-or-treating, they were giving them cookies and, homemade things, apples and things of that nature. So basically these corporations, as sneaky as they are, they figured out...
Sneaky corporations.
Yeah, right.
Sneaky
They wanted
corporations.
to
Well, maybe because corporations are people too.
right.
So people are sneaky, corporations.
Right. So as time progressed, and the foundation of the community started to separate, whereas people didn't really trust one another like they used to. These corporations, or these candy corporations, came in and said, "Well, why not give people who come to your house candy?" Because it's prepackaged and you don't have to worry about people putting, all types of poison and stuff.
Right. Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, God, we all came up in that generation to where they stopped. You stopped going kind of house to house, and maybe malls were safer to go get candy at because you couldn't trust what John down the street or whoever down the street was putting in the candy.
Yeah.
I totally remember those slogans.
Yeah.
They were like, if you see something that's kind of open, throw it away. And it could have razors. And I was thinking, how do you put a razor inside? Who's eating this chocolate that has a razor?
Right. And, it's just, and that all of that equated to them, I think 1/4 of all the candy that's bought throughout the year is bought for Halloween.
Now that was the interesting one right
There you
there.
go.
$2 billion.
Right. $2 billion.
On the chocolate.
Right, and then here we have the costumes, which apparently is about $3.5 billion spent a year. America spends about $3.5 billion on costumes annually.
Wow. Now, and speaking of chocolate, I found this article on ABC News that talked about how people being worried about what they're getting in the chocolate. This article talks about how there's roaches, cockroaches in chocolate, and that the FDA allows something like 60 insect pieces per 100 grams of chocolate.
Right.
Is acceptable. So.
Right. Remember, we built on that on our show. We were talking about fish, and we have some health shows you guys need to look at. But I know on that broadcast we brought out there's a specific document you can read which tells you how much of each pest or hair from rats that they allow in certain types of food.
Right.
They have it based on, milligrams.
The plus count milk and things of that
Right.
nature. Yeah.
So I mean, it's all there for you. I mean, we're all taking a risk. It just seems like no one is immune, man. We might just have to stop eating. So, you wanted to continue. I didn't want to.
Oh no, that was
undermine
really
the
it.
flow.
I just was curious on how candy got connected with Halloween, and it's basically just these corporations got clever and devised a way to slide in, and now, like I said, it's a $1 billion business. So,
So I mean, I can tell you just as a teacher, man, one of the hardest school days is the day after Halloween. All right, and some people equate sugar with hyperactivity. So I just wanted to kind of pass that around. Is there any truth to the fact that sugar is connected with hyperactivity in children?
Well, yeah, there is that obvious, right? The sugar rush, and it pumps your adrenals up, and you kind of go from there. But also, you got to think about what are the effects on the mind,
yeah.
right, of eating the chocolate, and that might be the more unstabilizing factor.
You
Like,
mean sugar affects the mind? All right, go ahead, brother.
There's been studies done. For instance, there's a study done here in California at Tidewater Detention Facility where these two psychologists wanted to test basically sugars and the effects of sugars. And so I want to say for like 4 months, they stopped sugar and they were just feeding people natural, healthy things. And as a result of that, you had 77% of thieving, right? Thievery went down 77%, and also assaults went down 80%. And I'm sure that's not because they weren't active people. You know what I mean? Meaning running around, they're like but it was more of just the mental effect of sugar and the imbalancing of it on the mind versus the hyperactivity.
Wow, and there's another thing. Sometimes I think that the whole idea of sugar being consumed in mass amounts, it begins to suppress the appetite. So, I'm one of those people that, I try to avoid sugar to the best of my ability. But I can truly say that sugar does lead to suppression of your appetite. And then it creates quite a few problems. For example, most of us were raised with the idea that if you ate too much sugar, it would lead to teeth decay. And then also the types of sugar that they have out there.
And which is funny to me, when you think about, okay, well, if sugar is decaying your teeth, what is it doing to the inside of your body? You know what I mean?
Because teeth are hard as hell, man.
Right.
That's your bones you're talking about. That's a good point.
Right.
In addition to that, I know there is an interesting history connected with sugar in terms of how certain areas where sugar has been manufactured, packaged, and then sent to different parts of the world. Again, we're talking about colonization, and you have areas in the world that is known for sugar production, which have been exploited by corporations, multinational corporations. That's why you need to check out Big Sugar. I think some of you remember.
Not Big Shug, but Big Sugar.
No, Big Sugar. Check out top documentaries free online. But one of the things that if you go back into history, you can look up some information about what happened on some of your cocoa production farms, which is basically the bean that's used to produce chocolate and manufacture that.
Right.
So the big players in all of this, you got to look at Hershey and look at their history in terms of chocolate manufacturing. It's a very dirty history if you can find that information widely publicized, but it's all out there, man. Now we're talking about candy, and we do also have to talk about how to identify sugar. I mean, since we know it's bad, is there a certain form of sugar that people can consume over others, or is it just all bad?
It's I really try to keep it simple. You know, you think about, yeah, there's sugar in fruit. Like fruit's natural, or it should be natural, depending upon where you know, where you get it from. But you know, that's your body will know what to do with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that that's the only thing you should eat, but if it's a choice between fruit and Snickers, you know that it's an obvious choice. You know, so
The Snickers.
yeah, because you don't want to turn into. You ever seen a commercial? You turn into Joe Pesci.
Oh.
You know, you're not yourself when you're hungry or something like that.
Right.
And, you know, that's an interesting segue into another point, is that, you know, any coach or any athlete, they'll tell you that before you play a major game or before you run a major race, you powering up with the candy bar is going to lead to an adverse effect in your performance.
Right.
I mean, I have yet to hear a professional say, yeah, man, I just eat a Snicker and it satisfies and I can play, you know, 4 quarters in a game. No
Right.
doubt about that.
Right.
Now,
Doesn't happen.
Cypher.
Yeah, emphatically now, Cypher.
No way. So,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that kind of came out in my research, and this is just being around, you know, just coming of age in this world of conscientious black people. One of the things that I first learned was that, you know, your white sugar, that's unnatural. So when you look at CNH, pure cane sugar, that's basically a lie, because, you know, when sugar is manufactured, it doesn't come out looking white.
Right.
That's your bleached form of sugar. So then some people got really intelligent and they introduced something known as raw sugar on the market. So if we have to choose the raw sugar. If you have to choose again, don't use any sugar.
Yeah, because you got to think, for raw sugar to be raw sugar, it had to have been manufactured.
Right.
You know. So
True indeed.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead, guy. No.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, as far as the sugar thing, you know, glucose, which is a sugar, is naturally occurring in the body. Whereas, you know, you look at like high fructose corn syrup, which is something that they synthesize and then manufacture, that has a very adverse effect on the brain, causing inflammation. It converts, I want to say, the free radicals, and within that process, you have increased cancer rate, brain disorders, all the way up to suicidal tendencies. Yeah, it's really definitely hard on the brain.
yeah, from my research, you know, ingestion of sugar actually basically has the same chemical response that it would, you know, if you were to take any kind of like narcotic, as far as the dopamine production.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the immediate high or the good feeling, and then you crashing.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
And that's as a neurotoxin.
Yeah.
Right, when it hits the blood.
And you know, I watched that you know, like appear among young people, man. You know, they'll eat, you know, they'll drink some fruit punch with a lot of sugar in it. They'll eat some chips with a lot of sugar in it, and they'll be upbeat for about 2 or 3 hours, and the next thing you see them, they crash.
Right.
You know what I mean, they have no energy. They want to go to sleep. So I mean, if you're not patient enough to do the research, like you hear presented in our broadcast, or just in our society at large, just look at the effects that sugar has on your children after you eat it. We all look for just one thing. Oh, you're hyper. I'm hyper because I ate a lot of sugar. But try to look at some of those signs. You know, is your child sleeping more than usual? Especially during these times when sugar is being pumped up steadily.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, so I guess it's a really good idea to ask, in terms of addiction and sugar, how do we wean our children, or get our children, or people in general, or ourselves, off of sugar? What are some alternatives that we should look into?
Well, I think first and foremost, awareness. You got to understand, you know, what you to look for when you look at a package, and you know, the grams of sugar, the different names of sugar, or the different ways they try to disguise what sugar is on the package. Look at serving size. Like, for example, you know, at my job they sell a Powerade, and I want to say like
Crazy.
yeah,
Man.
you know, at a
Shit,
gym they sell
Powerade
Powerade, right?
at a gym.
You know, which is basically Kool-Aid, right? But the sugar per serving is, I think, I want to say it's something like 40 grams or 35 grams of sugar or something ridiculous like that. But when you look at the bottle, it's like your, 12-ounce bottle, right? It says 2 servings, which most people just chug it down and drink it as one. So it ends up being like damn near 60 to 70 grams of sugar just in that, you know? So they try to trick you because you see, oh, it's only this amount of grams of sugar, but you have to look at the servings, how many servings are in it.
Right,
You know?
exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing.
Exactly. And how can they say that one serving across the board is a serving for everyone?
Right.
You know, I'll probably eat a little bit more than Teray. Teray might, you know what I mean? So it's crazy. You know, it's crazy. So.
And then you're talking about children. You know, it's even more devastating on the body because you know anything that we consume as adults, we have to break it down for children, right? Who are have lower weight and things of that nature. So the serving is extremely high in children.
No doubt. Yeah, exactly. And then you gotta figure when we were younger, right, and you get amped out on sugar, you'd run around and burn that off. Nowadays, people get amped up on sugar and they sit down and they play Call of Duty for like 12 hours.
Right.
Right? Because
continue to eat the sugar while they're playing the game.
Yeah. It'll keep you up, right? So every time you kind of get tired, eat some more, pop you back up. You're not necessarily hungry for a meal, right? So now you don't have to get up to walk away from your game and shoot people in the face. You can sit down and bite a Snickers and shoot people in the face and have it all in one.
There you go. So you know, I think
go ahead.
again. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just gonna. But to the original question, as far as detoxing people from sugar, you know, I would say one. Let's just start with the simple thing. Let's just start drinking some water. You know, if you drink, you know, some nice clean water, and you just kind of do that. There's also, you know, you can supplement. So you're feeding sugars, right? So why not eat some fruit and yogurt? That will surprisingly quench your thirst for sugar, right? As far as diet, right? You can go on like a high protein diet for a couple of days, 3 to 5 days, to kind of change burn that out of your body. Right?
That's one thing I noticed from my research is that a lot of vegetarians tend to eat a lot of sugar because their protein intake isn't as high as it once was.
Right.
Therefore, obviously, you're losing a major macronutrient, and you're not getting as many calories in your system. So, you know, you tend to crave sugar. You know, so
right to try to substitute
exactly
that you're not getting.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. One thing that I tell my clients is you know, and I tend to always say the juice fast, but you know, if you can get somebody to do a juice fast and get off of eating for say 7, 11 days, 15 days, even a month, then they just become more in control of themselves. And when they're more in the driver's seat, so then they don't have to feel like they need certain foods. You know what I mean? So I think that helps.
Wow, man, a lot of information here. I hope you're taking some notes, and more importantly, doing your own research. Let's remember that now we've discussed the second tool that, you know, essentially Europeans have used to enslave our people and undermine our culture. So that's the drug sugar, the big monster. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the real boogeyman and Hispanic Heritage Month. Peace.
Peace.
Great discussion. So,
this crazy love, how dear are two.
Peace. Welcome back to the Knowledge Yourself radio show. My name is Teray Allah.
Peace. Jakil Najallah.
Peace, Jarulullah.
And before we left, we talked a little bit about sugar and the harmful effects of sugar on the body, which is something that's consumed quite heavily during this time of year in the United States.
I want to say before
Go ahead.
before we jump into the last segment, I wanted to also say that from my research, sugar actually, does a lot of different things to the body that most people aren't aware of. But it also, what it does is it feeds cancer. So if you have cancer in your body, which we all do in some capacity, right? Sugar actually causes it to grow, multiply, and it basically gives it what it needs to progress.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Another thing I came across is, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to
Okay.
that process. Yeah, when it breaks down into free radicals, it could also come into formaldehyde. Right? We know that formaldehyde is kind of one of those things that will help also increase that cancer.
Right.
So yeah, definitely sugars.
Yeah. And another thing I came across is its effects on your immune system. Actually, it kind of makes your white blood cells, for lack of a better term, drunk. So it causes them
Sugar high.
Yeah, it makes them. It slows them down, so they're not functioning as rapidly as they they would normally. Therefore, if you're exposed to any types of illness or any types of bacteria and viruses, now
So
you
they're
can't.
like the LAPD, slow to respond. Huh?
There it is. There
I'm
it
being
is.
robbed. Half an hour later, hey, what's up?
There's some donuts that they eat. But yeah, so I just wanted to drop that real quick.
Thank you all, man. I mean, like I said, groundbreaking information. Make sure you do your own research, of course, and add on to the body of knowledge. So we're going to talk, this section is about specifically the boogeymen that we refer to as the European colonizers that came to the Americas. And they also went to other parts of the world as well. We know history shows that as being true. And also, I know Jakil is going to build on this, but please keep in mind that October is considered Hispanic Heritage Month. And we're going to kind of lean in a little bit more on that one because we've talked about this before. But I think we need to reestablish it again, why we are all original people. So we're going to begin talking a little bit about Columbus, since his birthday was observed on October the 14th. I mean, I can begin saying that, I'm 40 years old, I'm looking at 41, and I still cannot understand why specifically the United States continues to honor and commemorate a man who, first of all, did not discover America, nor the people who are already here, but has been said to be, among other things, responsible for quite a few murders during his time. He's referred to as Cristoforo Columbus, and his background apparently was in Genoa, Italy. And of course, there are always these swirling sources in terms of what his parentage was. So I want to kind of let that flow around the round table. I heard that Columbus was actually Jewish.
Okay, that's a new one.
Right, so they say that he's actually Jewish. So I don't know, what did you all, in your research over the years, what's your take on his parentage? What were his parents?
To me, I don't really look at that. I just look at his ways in action.
Okay.
That to me, if you look at his ways and actions, it's basically the ways and actions of most Europeans. So he's from Europe, in my eyes. Not to say that people outside of those regions weren't committing those types of acts, but that's the region where it went down the most. So. Yeah, so to me, I could care less about him as a person, as far as where he came from and things of that nature. I just look at his actions and how those actions are still prominent in this day and time because it's still going down.
Now let's get into those actions. Did you want to add on before we?
I was wondering, what you came to because I don't know outside of let's talk about he was born in the southeast,
right?
Europe, so
I mean, the story. I mean, and again, there are swirling sources about what the man's parentage was. One argument is that at least one of his parents were Jewish, therefore that would make him Jewish. But then there are other circumstances that say that, he was Catholic by nature, which is how he was able to be commissioned by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. So, you know, a lot of what we reveal in this show is that a lot of the terror that was carried out on indigenous people all around the world had a religious base. You know, you heard the God earlier. He said that crusade. You know, and I mean, you can apply that word to every single period of history where we came in contact with the Europeans, or at least they came into contact with us because we were already there. And one of the first fundamental efforts when they got into different parts of the world that we populated was to undermine our culture and put their religion in its place. So why don't we talk about, you know, how these particular explorers, beginning with Columbus, how they actually became the boogeymen in the parts and the people that they encounter. So I kind of wanted to give this over to Jerul first, and then we can kind of add on to that.
Yeah, well, I think they became boogeymen. They were boogeymen before they left Europe, because I think Europe was really a breeding ground for that mentality, which the mentality is simply, you know, about monetary gain. It was about gold. So Columbus was leaving to Asia, right?
He was going to Asia?
Going to Asia, right? In search of gold, you know. So he made it to Asia, which he thought was Asia, you know, but it wasn't Asia. Obviously, it was, you know, the Caribbean islands. And, you know, he saw people that he said resembled people of Ethiopia or of Africa. So original people, you know, and I'll just read a quote from his actual log that he took, and it says, "They brought us parrots, balls of cotton, spears, and many other things, which they exchanged for glass beads and hawk bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built, with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them. For I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want."
Wow.
So I mean, that right there is basically, you know, a precursor, or not a precursor, but it basically opens you up to the mind state of Columbus. It was about, we can take these people, take their land, and dominate them, and you know, have them do whatever we want them to do. So, you know, you know, you stated that you don't know why they still celebrate Columbus Day, which I do. I understand. I understand why they do, because Columbus is really, he stands for what Western society stands for. You know, let me take as much as I can get, and whoever stands in my way, I'm taking them out. So you could see it going on to this day in Iraq, Iran, these, you know, Arab countries, Africa. So, you know, that's just basic. That's the basis. He's the basis, or he'd be the idol for what they practice as far as Western society goes. So
and more so than any other explorer. You know, that's what's the interesting thing, is that, you know, I don't recall any other holiday in the United States being made for any of the others. Where's Magellan Day? I mean, that was a guy that in like the 14th century discovered that the world was not flat.
Exactly.
Among other people like Marco Polo, the Italian voyager. So in saying that, it lands smack dab in Hispanic Heritage Month, the celebration of a European who was responsible for not only, you know, opening up the gates for other explorers to come into the Americas and the Caribbean, but he was also responsible, and his men were responsible for killing indigenous people. So I wanted you to add on in terms of the Hispanic Heritage Month, and just exactly when did that start? What's the,
you know, as
what's
far
the
as
running
when
date?
did it start, I'm gonna have to look into that one a little bit more. But I know that the day, it's actually September 15th all the way to October 15th. So I think it's interesting that Columbus Day, or his birthday, the day that we celebrate as Columbus Day, is on the 14th, the day before the end of so-called Hispanic, Hispanic month. So, one thing that we do know about people is that people really only pay attention to the first and last thing that you're kind of talking about. So the fact that they in Columbus Day, Columbus Day is towards the end of National Hispanic Heritage Month. It kind of makes you focus on Columbus. So, in focusing on Columbus, one of the things that was brought up in those papers that my girl gave to me that I didn't bring, but that I did read. Again, babe, thank you for those.
Good way to cover.
Yeah, right? They were talking about how when you push these kind of things, Halloween, Columbus Day, European holidays on children, it has an adverse effect to kids who are not European, right? Because now it kind of downplays who and what they are and their add-on to society or what happened to the people. So we talk about the European version of the story, right? His story, not actually his story. So he comes in, kills a whole bunch of people, rapes a whole bunch of people. They bring in diseases, kills like tribes are gone, right?
Yeah, it
Just
said
wiped out.
something like 250,000 people gone, completely gone. Like
Yeah,
no one left.
right. Like the Tasmanians.
Yeah.
Find one of those. So when you look at that, they tell you about the good things that he did, but they don't talk about how they squashed the other people. To kind of when you realize that you were the other people, it puts you kind of at a lower place of looking at yourself. I think that's one of the the downfalls or bad side effects to teaching European history like that, or that one-sided history.
Yeah, I just wanted to read something else from the book.
Thank you.
I think it's very important that people have an understanding of who he really was and who they really were, as opposed to what they've taught. What we've been taught in school is about these great men who came, and it was about trying to change the predicament of the Europeans in that time, and came to this new land, and it was they got along, and there's Thanksgiving with these so-called Indians and stuff like that. The great depiction is right here. It said, while the men were sent many miles away to mines, the wives remained to work the soil, forcing to the excruciating job of digging and making thousands of hills for cassava plants. This is a quote from Las Casas, and I know you versed in him, but thus husbands and wives were together only once every 8 or 10 months, and when they met, they were so exhausted and depressed on both sides that they ceased to procreate. So as you can see, that's a means of eugenics being placed way back then.
Right, birth control and sterilization.
Exactly. As for the newly born, they died early because their mothers, overworked and famished, had no milk to nurse them, and for this reason, while I was in Cuba, 7,000 children died in 3 months.
Who said this?
Las Casas.
Thank you.
Yeah. Some mothers even drowned their babies for sheer desperation. In this way, husbands died in the mines, wives died at work, and children died for the lack of milk. In a short time, this land, which was so great, so powerful, and fertile, was depopulated. My eyes have seen these acts so foreign to human nature, and now I tremble as I write.
Right. So now it's interesting because the excerpt that I have from De Las Casas, that's excluded. All right. So now you get another dose. So a word about De Las Casas is he was basically a priest who traveled over with the Spanish to what's known today as the West Indies, specifically the parts of Santo Domingo and Cuba. He wrote about the things that went on during during that time. So he was around the 16th century, so that would make it around the 1500s. So in his narrative, it's called The Devastation of the Indies or The Destruction of the Indies. They have 2 different titles for it. But for the most part, one of the things that he said is that over a 40-year period, while the conquistadors or the Spanish colonizers, whichever name you want to use, were in those parts, Cuba, Santo Domingo, and the other islands, Jamaica was also mentioned. he said that over the course of 40 years, about 15 million people were killed in that process.
Wow.
So, I mean, and a lot, I mean, if you do the mathematics, like you just divide 40 by 15 million, because I'm giving you the rough estimation, you're talking about a couple of million a year, you know what I mean, or hundreds of thousands a year. And some of the things that he said was that, he witnessed the conquistadors grabbing children, throwing them into the lake, just out of sport, him grabbing, the conquerors grabbing children, the indigenous children of these islands, and bashing their heads into, mountains, just holding them by their ankles. There were things such as, and I have my students illustrated. I should have brought it, but, hindsight is a you-know-what.
Yeah.
One of the things that he said was that at some point, some of the indigenous people, ran into the hills of some of those islands. And the ones who were caught basically had their hands cut off, and then they basically, attached them to, like, put ropes around the wrists of the cut off arms and put it around the indigenous people's necks.
Wow.
And sent them to the hills, just sort of to send a message to them.
Wow.
And I mean, a lot of it, if you look, sorry guys, I don't want to knock your phone over. If you look at this book, this is a really good thing, but you could find it online. I mean, and Jarul is confirming this because, I mean, we could sit here a whole show and just talk about some of these atrocities, and we're only in one part of the world, the Caribbean.
Yeah. Columbus himself is noted for cutting babies out of pregnant women's stomach, taking the baby, throwing it, and then letting the dogs go. And,
Wow.
Ravage the baby. So.
Now, since we're talking about Hispanic Heritage Month and we're talking about Columbus, and we just mentioned some of what De Las Casas wrote, again, we're going to go back into this whole idea of the genetics of the lighter shade of brown. So the one thing, and this is not even an appeal, this is just at this point in the game, those of you who call yourselves Latino or you call yourself Hispanic, you got to begin with the grim reality for some of you, because others accept it and they embrace and they say, wow, I knew something, we had a lot in common with the brothers. It was just something that just clicked.
Right.
The reason why is because we're one people. So before we go into this discussion about why, first of all, we don't refer to our people as Hispanics or Latinos or anything like that. I wanted to give you a definition. So Hispanic, it says pertaining to Spain, especially ancient Spain, 1580s. So that would be the origin of where that first kind of came about, or it was being used. 1580s from Latin, Hispanicus, from Hispania, Iberian Peninsula, from Hispanus, Spaniard. Specific application to Spanish-speaking parts of the New World, in 1889, American English, especially applied, and we're talking about America now, since 1972, to Spanish-speaking persons of Latin American descent living in the United States. So in the United States, if you go back into the history, during Richard Nixon's administration, that was when the term Hispanic was applied to quote-unquote non-black Spanish-speaking peoples in the United States. So right there, go ahead, guys. I know, because you always go in on this one. Go ahead.
Well,
man.
it's just funny. It's funny that they illustrate non-black in describing it, because it's like, okay, you are not black.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And that to me is just clearly showing that that's what they're trying to really, establish out of that.
It's that separation.
Yeah, because if you look in the 70s, you had black and brown people fighting side by side. You had, what were they called? The Brown Berets, as well as the Black Panthers, really trying to come together and do some things together as one.
The Young Lords out there on the East Coast, our Boricua brothers and sisters.
Yeah. So they realize that we have to keep these people divided, otherwise we're gonna be in trouble.
Right, no doubt. And it's even in the PBS documentary they talk about. I want to say it's called the grandma or the black grandma in the
Oh yeah.
closet or something. They talk about how they separated black people who spoke Spanish from black people who didn't speak Spanish. And so like you talked about when you said non-black, whatever else that bullshit, that BS classification was. So it got, it's real like that. So you can definitely see how they're trying to further create that separate amongst people.
Crazy, because when I went to the Dominican Republic, which is considered Hispaniola, right, where Columbus did his dirt.
Speak on it.
There was people there who, based on what they said, he's like, "Wow, you look just like me." I'm like, "Yeah, we are one and the same," but it's just a language barrier. They think that, well, I don't speak Spanish, so I'm not Dominican, or he doesn't speak English, so he's not African American or black.
Right.
A lot of groups that are darker than me, if you call them black, they get offended by it.
Right.
A lot of like Belizeans and people that I come across. So it's crazy.
Right. I mean, and that's the perfect word to describe it. So I mean, just in your experience, because I know you've had a lot of experiences being out there in the Valle. Where they, some of the youngsters write NK on their skin, because they're body old gang members. What's been your experience in terms of this loss of identity among one group of our people? Why do you think they're so quick to say that, oh, I'm not black?
Oh, man. I think a lot of it is, we kind of touched on it as far as relating to the Halloween concept and the black cat and how things black are deemed negative, and then they continue that in television, TV, dolls, all kind of.
To dolls.
Yeah, I only say that because I went to go look at dolls because I've got a little girl and I saw some raggedy looking black plastic dolls and I was like, what kind of crap is this? They would never make. I've never seen a white doll that looked like that.
There you go, man.
So. They definitely have this image that they want to portray, and so you couple that with slavery, and not only that, just a lot of them they don't realize their history, right? They don't realize that. And who's my man? I wanted to bring him up. Juan Segan. That dude fought alongside so-called European or white people, right? And then when it came down to the end of it, they turned on that dude, and he lost everything. They didn't come to his aid, didn't help him with anything. In that time,
Segan was what would he be considered? Hispanic?
Yeah, they'd say that he's Hispanic. He's a brown C.
Okay.
And he was at the Alamo, and became governor, and was also a judge in Texas, and so was definitely a prominent person. And which is funny too, because along that same time they're trying to say that blacks and pardon myself, well y'all are black anyway, but Mexicans or Hispanics and whites are equal and one and the same. And then within that time, the white people started taking from the so-called Hispanic people, because when they saw the Alamo, all they saw was dead white people. And so, although there were a lot of brown people who died right there alongside of them, they don't get any mention. And so these people were like, well, if anything, we deserve this land because that's our people who died there. And they would start stealing stuff from all the brown seeds, the so-called Hispanics. And yeah, they ended up turning on my man Juan Segan and left him with nothing. But so to answer your question, right? So they don't know these histories. They also don't know that those same white people were lynching and hanging Hispanics, similar to they were lynching and hanging black people. So to say that we're different, right, is just to not know your history, because they weren't hanging and lynching. White people weren't hanging and lynching other white people. They were hanging and lynching black people across the board. Period.
And they were hanging white people too.
You know what I'm saying? But those people were like kind of more sympathizers. I guess,
yeah,
right?
they would be ones who looked at what the white people did.
They call it what it is, God. They
as,
look at
as
what the
wrong.
people did. It was like, nah.
What was wrong, and boom, and then they were like, okay, well, let me try to help people out and just do what's right.
Yeah.
And, you know, they were hung right alongside of them. I think one thing that's important is that the difference between original people who were brought here, you know, from Africa for enslavement versus what happened in South America is that the people who did it in South America spoke Spanish, and the people who did it to the so-called Africans spoke English. So if we were brought here and taught Spanish, we'd be speaking Spanish now, and we'd be speaking Spanish to those people who consider themselves Mexican.
Right.
There wouldn't be such a divide.
Right.
I think that's what they hold on to. I think a lot of times, if you don't speak Spanish, for whatever reason, you're not considered as
You
Mexican.
You're right,
or
exact, God. And
authentic.
even amongst themselves, if you're a brown seed and you don't speak Spanish,
Right.
the other brown seeds who speak Spanish are gonna look at you funny, like,
Right.
yo, man, you're not real Mexican or
Right.
whatever because you don't speak Spanish.
Right.
But see, there's a problem with that statement because that's not your
That's
original
not your
language.
language,
That's
right.
always
And
my
you can't
argument.
even tell people what your original language
Right,
was
right.
before the Europeans came in. Again, a lot of our people have been deceived for like 10 generations
Yeah.
in their family.
It's the wisdom
Who
God degree. Yeah.
continue to not, thank you,
Mhm.
who continue to not teach the right history, which is our people spoke a language before the Spanish came. Second thing we all need to know, those of you who claim that you're Mexican, Salvadorian, well, you know, anything related to what would be considered south of the United States, any of those countries, you have to remember that Spain is in Europe. It has never been anywhere else but in Europe. And in Europeans, they originate from Europe. They are white. They are Caucasian.
Right.
So if you want to lay claim to a group of people, right? Lay claim to the people as they were before the Spanish intermingle with them, and because you know a lot of those families and that lighter skin, it came out of rape, it came out of forced marriages. I'm sure there were some later on down the line. It was an understanding, but we do have to consider the history. Look at parts of Mexico today where the darker of our people, right, are sort of put in a social caste system. And on the opposite end of the color spectrum, you have the lighter of our people who claim superiority in that culture, but yet they're the same people. So why don't we take it to the genetic? We might make a really brief mention of the genetics. So when we talking about black, are we specifically basing it on this? All right.
Well, I see black as, you know, largely dominant recessive, right? So you're carrying the genetics that really have no birth date, you know, go back hundreds of thousands, millions of years, right? Whereas when you think about Europeans, what makes a Caucasian is that there was a mutation that occurred in them that's no older than 6,000 years old. So that's what makes them noticeably different from any other people on the planet based on specifically genes, right? It's those genetic mutations, blonde hair, blue eyes, white skin, that make them Caucasian. So that's a new trend. Whereas
Hashtag.
you know,
Hashtag blonde hair, blue eyes.
right,
Too
that's
many.
You said it's a new trend. I like that.
Right.
Man.
So, you know, when you think about original people, we just have genes that really, like I said, you can't put a birth date on it.
Yeah.
You know, so you could find the genes anywhere on the planet. You know, you can find them in Mexico, same genetics, and you know, you can even find the same genetics in Europe, right? So it's really, like I said, we've been everywhere. And what makes us different is us clinging to things that aren't necessarily true. Like, for example, us clinging to being called Hispanic or African American or this or that. Because, like I always say, if Europeans are 6,000 years old, we have no record of how long we've been on this planet. For me to say that I'm African American would be like my son naming me. You know,
Not even your son, like your son's son's
right?
son.
My great great grandchild naming
Coming
me.
back here.
You
True
know,
indeed. I mean,
And that was always my argument, God, is that how are you going to go by a classification that someone else gave you?
Mhm.
What do your people call themselves? And then if you don't know that answer, well, what did they call themselves before those people got them started calling them something?
right.
and if you can't figure that out, what are you going to call yourself based on your rationale and the science that you've been able to come up with?
Right.
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
mean, and that's the one thing is, and all of us have it in us. It's that laziness.
Mhm.
We more or less flow with the trend.
Mhm.
So everyone says brown pride, but you don't understand that brown is a derivative of black. It's not a derivative of white. So you have to make a decision. You have black at one end of the spectrum, which is the beginning of everything. And then you have white at the end of that color spectrum, and then you have brown. If you want to say there's a middle, you have brown. So you have to ask yourself, are you more white or are you more black? And some of you will say, well, why do I have to decide? Well, because according to research and what the guy just said here, that would make you a fool at this point, right? It is a part of your history. A really good thing you can do a search on is look at some of those pictures of Cortez coming into Mexico. There's one particular picture of Cortez where he's meeting the great king, if I'm not mistaken, Montezuma.
Yeah.
And in the picture that I looked at, it's a really good, accurate drawing where Cortez is encountering Montezuma and all of his people. And Montezuma is this guy's complexion, so to speak. If not this guy's complexion in the picture, you could visibly see it. Now let's take it full circle, because you bidding with two brothers that have researched this, and we talk all the time about these things. But remember, it was mentioned that Columbus came here, correct? He came here in the Indies and things of that nature, and he did his dirt. One of the things that I read in one translation of his journal is, and this is like the first couple of paragraphs, or at least the first couple of pages, where he mentions how the Moors, the ones who ruled Spain for about 700 years, the king of the Moors during that time actually kissed his king's hand. He said he saw it with his own eyes. He saw the king of the Moors, after being defeated by Spain, kissing the hand of, his king. Okay. So in saying that, like I always tell my students, that when the Spanish came into these parts and they saw these dark people, they said, hey, we need to kill these people. Because remember, some people that look just like them ran our country for about 700 years. So when they went to the Indies and they went to Mexico and they went to South America, they saw all these dark-skinned people and they said, we got to kill these people. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to share that, like, you have to make a decision. Either you black or you can be Hispanic all you want, but it doesn't make any sense.
I'm going to take you through history and a movie. So,
Go ahead.
right, just speaking of Juan Sigon, and his history and what went down when he made an allegiance, fought alongside Caucasians, won the war, had his rightful spot, and then they took it from him. And that was all along the same guise of we're one people, and then we're talking about Hispanics and white being one people, and then that was even on the census back then, if they were trying to say that they were the same. Well, that went down, right? So obviously you weren't the same, because they were killing certain of the same people and not others of the same people. So there's obviously a difference, right? Moving into present history now, they're trying to pull the same thing, right? They're saying Hispanics are Caucasian, and you guys should deem yourself as such. Now, when you take it to the movie Elysium, what happened in the movie? There was a movie, there were all the white people there with the brown people, And then all the white people left and left y'all here on Earth on the dying planet. So I would just say, think about that. What the guy was talking about is why you want to pick who you are is because there are certain people who will use you to get what they can get from you and then leave you stranded with nothing else. So, as far as picking your allegiance, it's more about being on the right side, right, and knowing the difference between right or wrong, or good or evil, however you want to look at that, and then associating yourself with that proper side.
Yeah, and to me, it's not even necessarily trying to choose a side. I think it's just really knowing the truth. Know the truth, and when you know the truth, quite naturally, you're going to gravitate to the true side.
Embrace the truth. Embrace the truth of God, because here's the whole point that. And I mean, we can bring the research to you because we got a really long time, y'all, to build. But it's been said to me that there has always been at least one person in every civilization, even primarily we're speaking about original people civilization, where there was at least one person who was trying to advocate the idea that God is a man. So in saying that, when you have some invaders come in, they're going to undermine all of that stuff. If you look at all the images on our walls, from as far as Egypt on down to the Americas and Mexico, you're always going to see some image of a man who is said to be a depiction of that particular people's god. So even the kings, people like Montezuma and some of the other kings in South America, they were referred to as gods. So here you have a group of people advocating this. So of course some invaders are going to come in and say, "Oh no, God looks like us."
Right.
So it's really sometimes this is kind of frustrating for us. You know what I mean? We're not going to hit you over the head with a hammer, but if you ever have the experience of sitting in a room full of the darker of our people and the lighter of our people, and you're trying to show them that we are all one people, and you say you're Mexican, and I say that's a nationality, and you say, well, I'm African American, that's a nationality. And when you're talking about you're black, well, and you can say that you're brown, then you're getting a little bit closer to that root of what we're talking about here. What was that show? I'm referring to our show. Why we are black. This was the first time we kind of went into real depth about this same discussion. And we'll keep bringing it back to you. So do you still think there's a Hispanic Heritage Month?
I think
Black Month Part 2,
right.
February and October.
Right. A lot of people would say, well, we're living in a different time now. Why does all that history mean anything? We've come so far from then and now, right? But I think a wise person who does the research can see that everything that went down in that time is still going down today. And the reason why it's going down today is the ignorance about it. People are ignoring the actual facts of the matter. And then people are isolating themselves, and not seeing the connection between the other people who are going through struggles, and everyone thinks their struggle is different than the next one. Mine is worse than yours. Your people didn't, your people deserved it, or this or that, not realizing that we are one and the same. So there's one struggle,
Right, and if they fooled us 379 years ago, they're fooling us now in 2013, even with the damn calendar, because quite frankly, Europeans have never known what the year was, but we use it because we're nice. So I want to know, did anyone have anything else they wanted to add on before we go into the read, view, and do?
No,
man, I'm good.
Man, this is all recursive. We're going to hit you with it again, probably way more concentrated about those people. Hey, look up Simón Bolivar. For all of you so-called revolutionaries who don't know that Simón Bolivar was black, look into Emiliano Zapata's heritage too. Actually, look at the black and white pictures of Emiliano Zapata, and you're going to see how dark he was. I don't know who the artist is out there who's like coloring him really light brown, but I've seen some actual black and white pictures that you can look at too on the internet. And you're gonna see how dark Emiliano Zapata. Not to keep using the god as an example, but Emiliano was probably, if not darker than this god, a little, this complexion, my complexion, because we all know he has African roots in his blood.
Mhm.
So let's go into the review and do.
Yeah, so
Brother Jerul.
yeah, definitely read this joint because, like I said, it not only does it cover the Columbus and that situation, but People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn.
Oh, can you tell him what the author looks like?
Oh yeah. Howard Zinn's a Caucasian man, or was a Caucasian man. He passed just recently, but he's one of the Caucasian men who probably would have gotten hung on a tree
Right.
beside us,
Right.
back in the day. But he basically told the truth. So
That's right. Shame the devil told the truth.
exactly. So like I said, he covers from Columbus all the way. So it's 1492 to present. So it goes all the way up until I think this came out when Clinton was in office. Around that time. So
Okay.
he's going to give you in-depth information from 1492 all the way up until then.
Wow.
Steve.
Is there
Yeah.
anything in video or audio?
Yeah, I think he has some videos on YouTube where he's just speaking and kind of going through some of the same stuff. So
And we could also throw in John Henry Clark, because he's had extensive discussions about Columbus, which are quite humorous. But yeah, check those two gentlemen out. As far as view, check out Big Sugar, and I know you have something on here with PBS as well.
Yeah. There's a great since it's Hispanic Heritage Month. There's a great thing that PBS is doing, and it's got like 6 videos, documentaries dating all the way from also talking about Juan Sigon all the way up to the kind of present history. So it's a good documentary to learn about some of the struggles that so-called Hispanics have gone through in America.
True indeed. So you gotta ask yourself: are you Hispanic? Are you Latino? Are you Latin American? Are you Latina?
Yep.
Are you Mexican? Are you Salvadorian? Or are you just black? Because that encompasses what? We make up about 3/4 of the world. Something like that. So just think in terms of you're claiming. Do you want to claim Mexico only, or do you want to claim the planet Earth? Because if I'm not mistaken, it was the white man that named all these countries for sake of greed and to create a map. But we call it what we call it here today. We call Earth home, and that's the bottom line. So as far as the do, I wanted y'all to go in terms of like starting your own, celebrating our own holidays. Like, how does that look in y'all's household?
I would just say, maybe get with your black woman and decide, okay, let's think of some days where we could do something like just amongst the family. So we could go travel somewhere and hang out there for a little while or whatever. Do it, yearly or however you want to set it up.
Right.
My thing is like, you shouldn't let anyone outside of your home tell you when you should celebrate anything or do anything for that matter. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, no, I would say, and I like that one. So I agree. Get with your black woman or just with your babies and make up a holiday, just like all these other made up ass holidays.
Because every holiday is a made up holiday.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
What was Columbus Day before Columbus? Just another day.
Right.
It was just another day.
Same with Christmas. Same with Easter.
So, pick a day and associate some kind of meaning to it that means something to you guys and then make it mean something and celebrate that. And that'll be your holiday. And, and depending what it is, add other people into it.
Right.
Who knows? You might get a day off of work.
Yeah, if we write it and work hard. That's what happened with Kwanzaa. Remember Kwanzaa?
Yeah.
So there you go.
It happened.
Well, I like to thank my brothers here for always, adding on and producing this great knowledge that we call the Knowledge of Self show. We would also like to thank the God Life Allah for making this possible as always,
Peace.
And especially and most importantly, our families, and that includes you, the listeners, who is also our family. We'd like to thank you for your continuing support And we'll just keep it coming, and please keep watching and tell other people. Anyone have anything else they want to add before we go?
Catch y'all next Sunday, and let me know what kind of holidays you guys come up with.
Yeah, we got a great one coming next week, so definitely tune in.
Peace.
Peace.
I gotta go back to the paper.
Yo,
Me too.
original iPad.